Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ask an Assistant, the podcast for executive assistants and the people that love us. I'm your host, Jess Lindgren. Let's get to work. This week's question comes from esteemed colleague Kate, who asks, "Hello, Jess. Do you have a favorite scheduling tool that you use?" Kate, I love a short, sweet, to the point question. Anyone out there listening who has a question, long, short, in between, if it's burning a hole in your brain, lay it on me at askanassistant.com. Get it out of your brain and into my inbox. I don't have a show without you. But back to Kate's question. I do have a favorite scheduling tool that I use, and it is my own brain. Here is the 2-minute high-level summary of that thinking. Number one, I mostly schedule things manually with a bit of timeanddate.com support if I'm working across more than 2 time zones. I have used pretty much everything. So this is number 2, moving on. I have used pretty much everything that's out there on the market in terms of scheduling tools over the years, and they all do roughly the same thing. Just pick one and stick with it. And number 3, even though I do 90% or more of our scheduling manually, I will set up a scheduling link when the situation calls for it. And definitely, I cannot express this enough. I appreciate the ever-loving heck out of you if you're able to send a link my way. Diving into the deep end of those 3 kind of higher level points. First, I do mostly schedule things manually, just a little bit of time zone support. Timeanddate.com helps keep me in check with my work before sending options out to anyone, because I spent the first 36 years of my life living in Minnesota, so Central Time is ingrained in my very being. I lived in California for 3 years. I swear within a week of living in California, my body and brain just beautifully adjusted. I was tired by about 11:30, 11:45 every night, in bed and asleep by like 12:15, waking up without an alarm at 7:45 every day. Like, my brain and body just really love. And to this day, I desperately miss the Pacific time zone. But I spent 3 years living there, and my executive still lives there. So I live a lot of my personal and professional life in the Pacific time zone to this day, even though I am coming up on now 4 years of living in New York. And even though it's almost 4 years, I, to this day, do not feel adjusted to the Eastern time zone. It just does not work as well for my brain and body as the Pacific time zone did. And it is still a struggle every single night to fall asleep. Like, our new rule for 2025 is at least in the bedroom by 12:30, even though that typically means we're falling asleep somewhere between 1 and 2 every night. And that makes our 8, 9 a.m. wake up time. Honestly, I'm getting out of bed closer to 10 most days, but it makes mornings a little rough. And professionally speaking, I don't start working until around noon Eastern, because my exec starts his day at 9, and I'm not going to start my day at 8 a.m. Eastern only to work until 8 p.m. Eastern. It's just not going to happen. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, historically, on top of the moving around I've done, the time that I lived in Minnesota, Central is just part of my fiber of my being. Historically, I've traveled a fair bit, and things are shaping up for 2025 to be spending a bit more time away from home than I have in recent years, which also really messes with your grasp on time. On top of all that, my executive schedule has a lot of nuance. Like, we used to do way more block scheduling, but it doesn't really work that way for us right now. Excuse me. There are days that have large, like, he likes to call them deep work times. But just with the way things are going right now, Q1, Q2, there are definitely days where I am scheduling into those blocks of time with my executive's permission. And those wouldn't show as available on a scheduling link anyway. So on top of all that, I am getting roped into way more calls than I used to. I really was living a fantastic call-free life. Back when I was a contractor, I'm too expensive to be sitting in calls. If you really want to do that, you can, but also as a contractor, you can't mandate that someone be on calls. You can agree to it. A contractor can dip out of it, but truly, you can't force a contractor to be sitting in calls on a specific day or time. That's one of the beautiful parts about being a contractor. Being an employee, however, I still did manage for many years to have very, very minimal calls. And if you hearken back to the one-on-one episode, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, and I'm not going to flip back to the schedule, but there will be a link to the show notes, in the show notes to that episode if you'd like to review it. Yeah, just as an employee now, our one-on-one used to be like once a week, 15 to 20 minutes max. Lately, I am needing like 15 to 20 minutes a day, several days a week. And just with the projects that are ramping up this year, I have to be on a lot more calls. He's in California. I'm in New York. I would be maintaining two separate scheduling links and going in and constantly opening things, freeing things back up, deleting availability. Like, why bother with a third-party tool if I can just visually look at the calendars, make a decision across time zones, and just send them manually? I know it's not ideal, but it's the way that we work. It works best for us, especially being across time zones. I think if we were both in the same time zone, it might make a little more sense. And if we were on the same, like, it's different. You know, when you work in an office that has like Outlook, you can just look at each other's calendars and see the free and busy times. You can certainly do that to an extent, and you can grant calendar permissions to each other to be able to see that. But it is like, it's looking at a lot of, you know, I said my executive schedule has a lot of nuance. Sometimes there's drive time, like just looking at each other's free and busy schedules, like having our calendars overlap with each other isn't super helpful either, because there is so much nuance. Like sometimes I'm building in drive time. Sometimes I'm building in time before a webinar or talk because he needs to tweak slides. Sometimes he doesn't need prep time because it's a presentation he's given before. Sometimes it's an interview, and even though we book an hour for those, maybe we only need 45 minutes, like 40 to 45 minutes typically. And I know that if I really desperately needed him for something for like 5-10 minutes, I can use the last 10 minutes of that time. You know what I mean? So there's just so much nuance in there that it just, doing it manually, it's clunky, it's a little bit slow, but honestly, with everything else that we'd have to be managing, it turns out to be faster at the end of the day. I have used a number of different scheduling tools over the years. They all do the same thing. Like, there are teeny tiny differences. Some of them can show your calendar as green. Some of them can show your calendar as red. You have a real strong predilection toward one color or another, go for it. Things have really advanced in the last 15 years. A lot of companies have absorbed each other. They find a system, process, tool, software, what have you, and buy it, and then it becomes part of their offering. Pick a tool that you like and stick with it. Like, just learn it inside and out, read through the knowledge base, take a webinar, ask your sales representative to give you a one-on-one tour. I don't care what it is, but pay for the license for it and stick with it. It just, that way you're supporting the company to continue doing its good work, and you aren't spending a ton of time relearning how to schedule things every time that you switch to a new software. Personally, I've been using Calendly for ages. There was a scheduling tool, if anybody remembers what it was called, I feel like it might have been Sunset, Sunrise, Sun something. Right about 10 years ago, I had just found out about it, and it was just the most intuitive, beautiful, wonderful scheduling tool. And like 3 months into using it, it was discontinued. If anybody remembers what that one was, please let me know, because when you search for like Sunset scheduling app, Sunrise scheduling app, it just tells you about sunrise and sunset for any given part of the world. It doesn't pull up a 10 plus year defunct scheduling app, surprisingly. But yes, I've been using Calendly ever since that one, whatever it was called, went out of business. We're a Google shop. We are not an Outlook shop. Google somewhat recently, I want to say within the last year, give or take, could be 5 years for all I know, but I was just made aware of it about 6 months ago. That Google has essentially a competitive product. It's just a scheduler that links right up with your calendar. You can send out, I think, 15-minute, 30-minute, 60-minute, and it just does all the time zone conversion right in there. Very comparable to Calendly and any number of other scheduling tools that are out there. And just recently, within the last week, I have signed up for an account through You Can Book Me, because I'm working on a project with Jeremy of the Leader Assistant podcast. So as I continue, I'm definitely going to give the Google option a go, because if we can stop paying for Calendly, we probably will. And You Can Book Me, I'm really excited to try it out. The marketing emails, I don't even know if they're marketing emails, like all the setup emails, the automation from You Can Book Me has been a little overwhelming. I've gotten at least once a day since I signed up. But I think that's pretty typical when you're signing up for a new account for something, that you get put into their automatic welcome sequence or whatever you want to call it. But Jeremy really loves it. I totally trust and value his opinion and judgment. So I'm really excited to give it a shot, and we'll definitely report back later on what I think. Even though I would say probably 90+% of our scheduling manually. I will set up a scheduling link for specific projects. For example, we used to host a podcast. I mean, I didn't host it, but I did all the nuts and bolts behind the scenes for this podcast. We used to have a podcast that would record once every 4 to 12 weeks, just depending. I definitely tried to just quarterly bang out 20 episodes. But you're not always lucky enough to get that. You're not always lucky enough to have a big enough chunk of time to get 20 of them through. So sometimes it would be 4 episodes once a month. Sometimes it would be more 8 or 16 episodes or 20 episodes if I was lucky, once a quarter. But whenever it was time to schedule, because it was a bunch of 30-minute back-to-back, I could set up, I think it was 2-hour chunks at a time is what my executive said he could handle. It's been a few years since we've done this, so the details are a little fuzzy, but at least you get the idea. So I would set up 2-hour chunks, even if it was we would just take 2 days and do 2-hour chunk with a 1-hour break in the middle. So he'd just do 8 hours worth of scheduling. So that's 4, 8, 12, 16. So we could bang out 16 episodes in 1 week. If we were lucky, if we had the time, if he had the bandwidth, if I could get enough people who were waiting for a chance to be on this show to pick a time and schedule. Somehow though, the days and times that we picked always worked for our guests. I was always so lucky. It was such a breeze to schedule everybody, just send out a BCC'd email. Hey, I've got times available for this podcast. Go ahead and choose one. As soon as you choose one, I'll get your email notification that you picked a time. I'll follow up with the rest of the booking process from there. Calendly, I could not have done it without Calendly, without some kind of scheduling tool. I definitely, for the first couple months, tried it manually, way too much back and forth. Just being able to set up a scheduling link for this one-off project a few times a year, total lifesaver. At the present moment, when I am recording this in March of 2025, my executive and I are up to our elbows in launching his latest book. So I will definitely be setting up an interview link for our PR person to share with interviews that they're pitching us for. I do so much of our scheduling manually, but I will absolutely adore you, love you forever if you come back to me with a scheduling link. Every time that I field some kind of scheduling request, I just say, hey, we're based in the Pacific time zone. If you have a scheduling link, please lay it on me. It just makes my life so much easier. I always feel like a teeny tiny bit of a thorn in somebody's side when I'm we don't have a scheduling link, but if you have one, if you could give it to us. I truly just envy people so much who can and do maintain block scheduling, who have regular days and times that it works for them to be able to use a scheduling link more regularly, where it's not something that you're constantly managing, blocking, unblocking availability for the scheduling tool. Like, I envy you so much. And I really wish that that was still my life in the office. There's so much nuance, especially these days. And I long for the days where we are able to have that kind of block scheduling back in our lives. And Kate, I hope you found all that helpful. Like, just pick a system and a supporting tool that works for you. Try out a few different scheduling tools if you want, but pick one and stick with it so that you're not constantly learning and relearning and relearning how to schedule things. Like, I really wish we had much less play in our schedule. Cannot wait for the day that, like, I'm loving how busy we are. I'm loving all the projects that we're working on. It's so much fun. It's so fulfilling. It's so exciting. I'm learning so much, but I really miss the days where having just a basic, here's our 30-minute link, here's our 15-minute link, here's our 45 and 60-minute link, sending out the right link as appropriate. I miss it. I wish it was more effective and easier for us in these days, and I totally envy you, and good for you when you find the scheduling tool that works for you. As always, thank you so much for listening to the show, and lay your comments, questions, thoughts, concerns on me at askanassistant.com. I don't have a show without you, and I appreciate all of your support so much. A huge welcome to everybody who's here by way of the Leader Assistant podcast. Jeremy, I love your work. I really appreciate you having me back on the show and putting some episodes of Ask an Assistant into your feed. So again, welcome to everyone who has made it here by way of the Leader Assistant podcast. And an even bigger thank you to everyone who has signed up for my Substack. I very unexpectedly, I put up a paid option just kind of as like hey, if anybody ever wants to kick me $5, cool. And a few people have kicked me $5. So thank you so much to everybody who has signed up for a monthly or annual subscription. Someday, I adore working with my executive, but I would love to be able to devote more time and energy to working on Ask an Assistant and developing community and programs and resources for all of you. So again, I would love your comments, questions, thoughts, and concerns. askanassistant.com. Sign up for the newsletter if you're feeling fancy, and let me know what you want to hear about in the coming episodes. I definitely have received some great questions lately and can't wait to hear from more of you. So until next week, take care.